SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Introduction to Urban Planning. In this session today, in the process of understanding the different urban issues and align with need and objectives of urban planning, we are going to look at another important layer of our cities and life, culture. We will explore culture in our cities from planning perspective and how planning can address the sustainable development along with our cultural growth. This topic becomes very important and close to us, particularly in India, as each one of us brings in so much diversity because of our culture and also takes pride in our identity, practices and history. So accordingly, today's lecture will cover culture, its significance and why it is important for sustainable development. We will look at international intervention, then we will look at culture and cities, we'll look at what are the potential interventions and the challenges. Thereafter, we will look at the international and national cases in brief to see how we connect culture with city planning. Further, we will look at how historical perspective on culture has been in the urban areas. This is mostly in the international context. We will also look at different approaches adopted for culture in cities at the international level. Thereafter, finally, we'll look at interventions in India. Currently, this is limited to the government interventions we'll talk about. So accordingly, the expected learning outcomes are that after completion of the course, you will be able to discuss culture, its significance and why it is important for sustainable development. You will be able to list the key interventions, international and national. You will be able to discuss potential interventions and challenges of culture in cities with support of case examples. You will be able to identify international and national cases related with cultural intervention in cities. You will be able to review the historic perspective on culture in cities. Further, you will be able to name, explain and give examples of different approaches adopted for culture in cities. Furthermore, you will be able to list and review interventions in India. Each one of us must have participated in our family traditions, walked through different neighborhoods in our places, traveled to many other places in the country and abroad, and must have seen, experienced and tasted culture. Many of you must have earned money by playing instruments or by dancing or by clicking pictures, or volunteered to show your friends your culture, and probably also took pride in your identity and must have often debated to defend your culture. And maybe you sometimes felt insecure or isolated or disconnected in places because of being from different culture or being a minority. You may realize that the culture is arguably one of the richest and most complex in any language. You must have learned and must be still learning to behave in certain ways. We see that culture is said to be material and symbolic, belonging and being, pattern and process, macro and micro, commodity and public good. So it is complex. We also experience and feel that addressing culture is very important for development. The United Nations Secretary General then Ban Ki-moon recognized in his opening remark at the General Assembly thematic debate on culture and development held in New York in June 2013 that too many well-intended development programs have failed because they did not take cultural settings into account. Development has not always focused enough on people. To mobilize people, we need to understand and embrace their culture. This means encouraging dialogue, listening to individual voices, and ensuring that culture and human rights inform the new course for sustainable development. So, by this statement, you may get a sense of the importance of addressing culture and also how one should approach it. In the past years, many international interventions have been initiated. Like we can see, UNESCO has been propagating culture cooperation in series of its conferences. In the World Summit on Sustainable Development, Johannesburg in 2002, it was underlined that in addition to the three pillars, economic, environmental and social of development, there is a fourth, the cultural pillar. And diversity today is considered a collective strength. We also see that UNESCO, through the Alliance of City Culture, formulated network of creative cities in 2004. We may see the snip of their website for this initiative. There is also raising concerns for minority, people of color, people of different orientation. We see there is also raised concern for indigenous people across the globe because of their historical denial of their right to control their own development. Often their perception, interpretation and view of development of the said communities does not correspond to that of the dominant society. In many cases, there has been adverse effect of industrialization and urbanization on the vulnerable communities. Now let us talk about culture in cities and try to understand the potential and problem. Every city we see displays the inherited culture of a place. It contains diversities and also creates a cumulative culture and indicates future of culture amidst modernization. Therefore, it requires that culture is addressed properly in the urban context as cities are growing rapidly and transforming at a fast pace. There must be many places in the cities, internationally and nationally, with which you may distinctly connect, and probably that must be because of the culture of the place. Our choices and selection may vary a lot. Some of the international examples I quote here include Chinatown, Little Italy, Times Square, African Market in New York, Farmers Market in Ithaca, New York, and Millennium Park in Chicago. So here you can see the range of cultural products and processes at the city level through few international pictures. And probably you can think of cumulative image of these cities. Now let us look at India. When we talk about a country, you may find that each city in the country has so much diversity and also displays its cumulative culture. And our cities also indicates the state and future of our diverse culture and the community in the city. Let us see Benares in our context. Probably most of us very well relate to the place, must have visited or seen it virtually through different mediums. Benares, located in the northern part of the country along the country's holiest river Ganga, is the Hinduism's greatest city. City offers complex constitution of population, old artisan communities, coexistence of a commercial mentality with mysterious halo of sacredness, and intellectuals and thinkers who are constantly preserving the city's tradition. Among many communities in the city, like you may find wooden toy makers, panwalas, mithaiwalas, musicians, navik, we find weavers and their neighborhoods in the city. The maker of most renowned and commercially important product of the city, the Banarsi sari, clearly claim to be native. They are characterized as religious majority, as Muslim and highly skilled artisans. These communities are from low income group and are seen as low class as documented by Neeta Kumar. Let us see how they contribute to the unique product and cumulative culture of the city. The community strongly forms the part of the identity of Banaras. They take pride in their identity. The community has strong and interwoven social and economic ties. So we see they contribute in the economic and social aspect of the city. We also find their role in history and the future of Banaras. Let us see how communities sustain. They sense power, pride and freedom in the city. Community finds the ability to adopt the life pattern of their own choice and has immense love for the place. The community's ability to claim and sustain their economic interdependency within the city contributes to solidarity between communities and within the city economic framework. There is possibility of vertical mobility within the occupational levels of the weavers. There, as documented by Neeta Kumar, there are 3 levels of production hierarchy. One is laborer working under another's roof. Second, we see weavers working at home for others. And third, the highest level we see is weaver working at home for themselves. So they are in charge of the entire business. So we see these vertical mobility which is there within the system for the weavers. So we see how they have sense of power and pride and strong role in history, social, economic framework and the future of the city. And they also have the channel for vertical movement within the system. However, they are limited, but they do have channel for vertical movement. So we see how through culture, city's identity, history are built and the economy as well as the community sustains. However, these communities, like many communities in this city, are facing challenge of transformation and are witnessing slow and silent end. It brings us to comprehend the future trajectory, like what is going to happen, will the community survive, not survive, this pressure. It is important for us to review our stories and how we are approaching to address these problems and be aware of what fate we bring to our communities. So from urban planning objectives, restoring the culture, beauty, community, allowing full potential of our people to explore, quality of life and generating employment are few of the purposes we try to address. In this direction, we see that there are a lot of government initiatives which have been taken place. We also see that various community organizations also work on ground to ensure continuous safeguard of the community and to keep them competitive in the market through marketing and technological innovation. These initiatives such as Weaving School opened in 1915 and several agencies in the 1950. We also see past initiative of 2015. We find Ostad scheme for traditional artisans in Varanasi by Union government. We also see Hriday. We had seen this in our previous section as well, where we covered special purpose plan. We looked at the city heritage plan done by Ministry of Culture. Banaras is one of the city which got maximum support under the mission. We also see that 7th August is initiated to be celebrated as National Handloom Day to conserve the weaving culture. At the same time, we see that how different segments come together, people like you and me, to cherish and support and revive the culture, which truly indicates our willingness to bring positive change in our culture and cities. So through Banaras, we tried to get some understanding of potential and problems of culture in the city and aligned interventions. Now we look at yet another city from minority culture. We will look at Ranchi city, capital city of Jharkhand, which is known for its indigenous or Adivasi people. We see that Ranchi is the state capital of Jharkhand state, the state which was formed based on its socio-cultural and geographical distinction. The current context of the city shows mixed picture of potential cultural vibrancy and uniqueness, numerous intervention, yet we see dying culture amid the challenges of development and modernization in the city. We see unique indigenous culture of building house. In this image, you can see the colorful architecture of Santhali community of the state. These are dwindling with change in the urban landscape. We also see presence of regional movie and folk song generating local economy. We see unique culture of history preservation through megalith, which is locally called as Patalgadi. We see the courtyard culture. We see the culture of dancing ground called Akhada in the city and the region. You may find sacred grove worshipped in the neighborhood, valuing and preserving environment. Unique rituals that add to the life of the city. You can see in the picture the Sarhul's festival where nature is worshipped. You see the traditional farmers market in the city in this picture. Parallelly, you see massive investments that are made for cultural infrastructure development in the city like we see in the picture here. However, despite investment and vibrant culture, the living culture, the day-to-day life, the community, the traditional places are slowly dwindling away because of urbanization, modernization and transformation and the way we approach it. As we see the oldest and the most sacred place now forming the backyard of the prominent shopping complex in this picture, vernacular architecture and sacred places curtailed in slums. Further, the research also shows that the indigenous community in the urban area feel loss of culture and loss of sense of pride and loss of ownership despite all massive investment in culture, infrastructure and activities like you had seen. So, we see that it's a point to reflect that cultural interventions do take place, yet the results may vary. So, let us see how through urban planning we have tried to understand it and address it. In the Indian context, even though we as a nation are known for our cultural identity, from the urban planning perspective, we have not yet substantially addressed the culture in the planning process. Until recently, through the government mission of Hriday, we started seeing integration of urban planning process with the cultural intervention. You may recollect that we saw City Heritage Plan as an example of special purpose plan in previous lecture and also saw a list of cities covered in the mission. Today we will see across the globe how culture is addressed through planning interventions. Let us first historically review the changes we had in our perspective towards culture and our cities. So, how did we started thinking about it and how did our entire idea change in due course of time? We see that during 1900, 1910, cities were viewed as work of art. We see the picture of White City, District of Columbia. They had the concept to make city beautiful. During 1910-1950, we see cultural zoning was emphasized upon, under which civic, cultural centers, neighborhood facilities like parks and playing fields were planned. In 1960-1970, influenced by Jane Jacob, her writing on culture of communities was promoted, under which community arts facility and conservation heritage movement were undertaken. During 1970s, flagship projects were undertaken to highlight the uniqueness of cities as well as attract investors and tourists. During the 1980s, with the downfall of industrial growth, culture started being considered as an engine for economic growth and urban regeneration. So, from here we started using culture for the economic purpose and for the purpose of regenerating the urban areas. Zukin, in her book in 1995, The Culture of Cities, propagated the idea of culture. And this idea was reflected in cities of Barcelona, Baltimore and Glasgow. During this period, initiative of European City of Culture, later renamed as European Capital of Culture in 1999, was launched in 1985 by European Union, wherein cities were designated for a period of 1 year, during which cities were given a chance to showcase its cultural life and cultural development. Thereafter, between 1990 and 2000, the concept of creative city, where the idea was to tap human capital associated with culture for the purpose of economic growth of cities, this idea became prevalent at this time. Thereafter, we see that since 2001, the focus has been on sustainable communities with emphasis on culture and quality of life, livability, space shaping, creative clusters and living places. Now, let us look into approaches adopted to address culture in cities. So far we had seen how historically we evolved from making the cities beautiful. We started seeing that how it was, it had potential to make economic benefit, and then we started regenerating our cities, and then eventually we came up with how we should focus on making our communities sustainable. So now we'll look at what different approaches were adopted to address culture in cities. The above discussed changes in understanding of culture have resulted in different approaches adopted for addressing culture in cities. These approaches, incorporating culture in the planning of cities, have been categorized into 3 models by Evans as culture-led regeneration, cultural regeneration, and culture and regeneration. The cultural-led regeneration model is envisaged to make use of cultural infrastructure like theatres, exhibitions and all these things, places and cultural activities, places where you dance or gather to drive the development. Flagship projects and creative cities concept fall within this ambit. Flagship projects can be understood as individual buildings or complexes created through the development of built form and architecture to create cultural landscape defining the identity of the cities. These projects have been developed by designing or reusing the existing infrastructure or open space for large events. It may use cultural activities like festivals to promote such projects, eventually escalating development for the host cities. So, the idea was like such activities would happen and then the host city would eventually get benefited by the economy of it. According to Miles, in his writing in 2005, this concept was also anticipated to provide cultural meaning to the place and community. Examples identified within this concept include Newcastle Gateshead, Quayside in United Kingdom. You can see another example, Millennium Bridge, London. Gherkin Building in London is yet another example which attracts tourists. You can see Glasgow's Scottish exhibition which supports mega projects to host culture in cities. Likewise, you can see Tate Modern in London as another example. Guggenheim in Bilbao in Spain is another example which can be considered following this approach to address culture in cities. Similarly, we see Rope Walks Quarter in Liverpool as an example within this approach. So, with these examples, we see how cities have tried to massively invest in cultural infrastructure and places and activities to facilitate regeneration of the cities and economically develop them through culture. By seeing the examples of the approach, you must be reflecting on the positive as well as the negative aspect of it. This approach has given beautiful results, as you have already seen in the pictures, in the cities and attracted tourists, but have been also criticized. We see that cultural-led regeneration model approach has been criticized for having not made a major impact on the ground in real practice and having been limited to aesthetic aspects. So you can see all the beautiful buildings and setup which came up. So that's been the criticism, that they have been limited to the aesthetic aspects. Even economic benefits are found to be moderate. So as per the anticipation, the economic benefits are very moderate. They have also been criticized for bypassing the local community with respect to their participation and ownership, while favoring the middle class and or the managers of culture than the actual residents or the artist. So you see that how the local communities have not been engaged or partnered with. So those are the criticism we see in this kind of approach. Criticism also includes misuse of culture to accommodate high-profile art facilities. Such interventions also lack evidence of their benefits. So we do not know whether they really bring benefits or not to what is expected on ground. Now, let us look at another model. We see the cultural regeneration model. According to Evans, 2005 cultural regeneration model, in comparison to cultural-led regeneration model, adopts an integrated approach and makes culture an integral part of the planning process, interweaving it with the local policy to meet the overall goal of the city. By integral part of the planning process, it means linking with different levels of plans and process. And interweaving it with the local policy means creating and aligning relevant policies with the existing or modifying the existing to meet the objectives of the planning, like we had seen in the beginning of this class. Cultural planning is another term we see, is a contemporary approach adopted globally for strengthening the place relationship, identity, community value and cohesion. We also see that this cultural planning also falls under this category, what we are seeing right now. The idea of cultural planning became prominent globally in late 1980s and early 1990s, with roots in the US and UK, Europe and Australia. And the planning in the 1990s has been described as notable for the emergence and increasing popularity of cultural planning. So the entire concept got very, very popular in this particular time. We see that it got incorporated, many cities incorporated this particular cultural planning aspect in their cities. However, we also see that cultural planning and cultural policy are used interchangeably by the writers during the time. So you will see that the terminologies have been interchangeably used. We also see that the scholars highlight the integration of cultural policy with the local authorities and the role that the art and cultural policy played in cities in Europe. So cultural regeneration approach is considered to be forward looking. So this is well appreciated approach. It facilitates a broader understanding of the culture, both as a product and a process, and tapping on the community's aspirations. So it really connects with what really people want, and then it really builds upon that. It bridges the anthropological way of life perspective, meaning our day-to-day lives. So these are all connected with the planning process, with aesthetics and cultural resources. So all kind of interventions which you saw, it connects those day-to-day life with that. And it creates the important aspect, it creates the enabling environment, meaning positive environment through market, training, land use and policies, subsidies and so on to support community to meet its long-term sustainability goals. It is important to note that communities' sustainability goals are attained through larger framework integrating diverse organizations and players with the cultural sector and communities. So in this planning aspect, we see that it needs a lot of integration with different organizations coming in place, such as we need integration between urban planners, urban designers, education departments, sports department, research institutions, recreation, tourism, commerce, environment, creative people and industries. They all need to work together under this planning. Cities under this model have demonstrated that strong joint leadership of urban local bodies and culture sector can eventually benefit cities and its communities to strengthen their relationship. There are numerous examples in this category. As I said, this became very prominent and popular. Examples in this include the cities from United States like Auburn in Lee County, Alabama, Austin in Texas, Boston in Massachusetts, Boulder in Colorado, Chicago in Illinois, Douglas County in Colorado, Portland in Oregon, and so on. We also see numerous cities in Australia, which include Bankstown in Sydney, Fairfield in Sydney, Kingston in Victoria, Newcastle in New South Wales, Parramatta in Sydney, Port Stephens, Sydney in South Wales, and so on. We find large numbers of cities which prepared cultural plan, naming few in Canada as well. Brampton in Ontario, Calgary in Alberta, Markham in Ontario, and so on. There's a large list of these cities which you can see. All these plans integrated culture with the mainstream policy planning. These cases have demonstrated appropriate allocation of resources, places, and partnership, including art sector, urban design, and industries required for them to achieve their larger goals. The scholars suggest that even though the concept is very good, you must be seeing and reflecting that even though the concept is very good, this approach has suffered practical problems in translating the concept on ground. The problems identified by critiques have been of diverse nature and level. Key highlighted reasons are challenges encountered with institutional arrangements, like you saw that so many interdepartments would come in. So, there are challenges which encountered with institutional arrangements, capacities, and diverse distribution of responsibilities and authorities to handle complex requirements at state and the local level. We also see lack of planning guidelines and operational framework in practice. This has been highlighted by the scholars. We further see that in practice, the entire concept suffers from several issues, including like frequent replication of strategies across cities, which costed the indigenous diversity. So, you saw that so many cities adopted the concept. So, it's been replicated a number of times. So, it really loses the uniqueness which it has. Further, in spite of the broader understanding of the concept of culture, interventions mostly contain art in practice. So, despite of all the concepts, we see the ultimate the product of the intervention is art. The approach has been further criticized for being guided by the market than the social cause. So, we do see that we are connecting it to day life, but then the entire intervention is criticized to be connected with the market, and it is said to be disguised real estate venture in the name of culture. Further, we see that interventions under cultural regeneration have also gained criticism for fragmented and unreal spaces, contested spaces, like we are where there is competing, people are competing for the places, this is my place and this place, whose place, and so on. And as in case of, we can see it in Barcelona, and for diverting, there are also criticism related to diverting public spending from mainstream education and social programs into all these kind of projects. Such interventions lack perspective of the local communities, and further, communities also do not consider themselves to be part of these interventions, as in case of Barcelona El Raval case. We see there is a documentation where community doesn't consider these interventions to be their they being part of these interventions. And we see Birmingham Afro-Caribbean youth, Chicago South Siders, and the occupants of Salford's precinct housing estate that have failed to establish physical connect with the community in the projects. Further, such large repetitive interventions with huge investment lack evaluation, so we do not know whether they are effective or not. Information on what works and what does not is largely not known for these projects and is also not sought for, according to the scholar Evans. Now, let us see the third model, culture and regeneration model. Culture and regeneration model is a more prevalent one in practice. The scale of projects categorized under such model is small and most often become gap-filling approach post-planning. Hence, is also termed as retrofit culture approach. It is categorized by lack of integration with the overall planning process. The probable cause for this lapse is difference in responsibilities, capabilities of the organization involved, and lack of supporting structures. So, you might see not all the cities and nations would have that kind of capacities and support system to undertake these kind of work. So, we further see there is lack of experience of larger projects involving integration with the city level planning, and multiple agencies is often the cause of prevalence of this model. However, this approach can have a positive outcome. So, even with this, people can come up with positive outcome in their cities. Further, there is an ongoing debate on the provision of the facilities for culture in cities in a centralized or decentralized manner. So, there are debates like whether the top-down approach should be adopted or bottom-up approach should be adopted, as well as we see that there is also discussion on cultural district and decentralized mosaic. So, should we develop cultural district or we should have pockets of things. Cultural district approach appears within the larger framework of creative city and is explained as clustering together of cultural activities in a well recognized labeled mixed use area of the city, in which high concentration of cultural facilities services as anchor of attraction, often centering around the large art institutions. Cultural district approach is adopted due to a preference of zoning tool among the urban planners and is further supported by economic interest. Examples of district approach include Civic Center in San Francisco, Lincoln Center in New York, and Seattle Center in Washington, Philadelphia. This approach has been criticized for being away from the community and neighborhood. So, if you create a cluster, that really becomes a distance far away from the community, and has been criticized for depriving the community for larger and frequent participation. So, because of the distance, they could not really participate frequently and cannot participate in larger number. Within the larger framework of cultural interventions, this decentralized approach is adopted to encourage the distinctiveness of the neighborhood and attain larger and diverse participation within a city, unlike the cultural district approach to concentrate cultural activities in clusters. This approach is particularly promoted for cross-neighborhood interaction, building local consumptions, and recycling of local spending for the overall growth of neighborhood and city. Further, it aligns with the support for grain approach by Jacob rather than mega projects. Soho, Little Italy, Chinatown, Greenwich Village, St. Paul Chambers Orchestra, Walker Arts Center, Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and so on are the examples of decentralized approach that facilitate uniform spread of neighborhoods infrastructure across the city. You are looking at the picture of Soho here from New York City. In this example, we see the transition of the abandoned place in Italy through the intervention. This vis-a-vis cultural district approach is criticized for lack of vibrancy and interest in all neighborhoods for necessary investment. So, we saw all the three approaches adopted in while dealing with the culture in cities. In general, all the approaches to address culture in cities discussed above have been criticized for lack of understanding of the causal relationship and its impact on host cities and the communities. Furthermore, these approaches also lack conceptual coherence, realistic definition, and are often overestimated for its influence. The gap in citizen participation and vague goals are also prominent in all identified approaches, further requiring enabling environment for the community, and its clear perception and its translation on ground remains a challenge. Understanding of institutional alternative required to attain cultural goals and studies evaluating different approaches are also limited in all these models. Connecting with our daily life and the communities, we see we need to reflect on what approach is suitable for us and how we can evolve our approach to address our cities. So, you all can see, think of, we saw Benares, we saw Raji. You can also look at your own city and look at what kind of interventions are happening and where do we really, what kind of model we are adopting and what our approach should be. We will now look at the intervention taken in Indian scenario. Planning for all the cities is limited to provision of standards and hierarchy of community facilities and their incorporation in land use plans. Through urban and regional development plans, formulation and implementation guidelines, URDPFI guidelines, 2015 acknowledges the need to address culture and addresses the need to make provisions for the same. However, it does it only through the limited cities, which it identifies as heritage cities. This is further limited to selected heritage areas within the city, like few which you can really count in the number of cities you have in the country, facilitated through local area planning and not integrated at the master plan level. A number of schemes with massive financial outlay have been launched by Government of India for urban development and provision of infrastructure and housing in cities. We have also started collaboration for Creative City Network, which we talked about in the beginning. Some of these schemes are Hriday, which we had seen, Rajiv Awas Yojana, Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, which was there, Basic Services for Urban Poor, which was there earlier. Now we have Amrut, which we had already seen, the smart cities also we have seen. So, all these do address to the culture component from the urban planning side. Moving further, just I would pick up Hriday to review like how our approach is at this current time. Hriday was considered as an exemplary shift in the Indian context based on the opportunity and perspective it offered. It brought urban planning, economic growth and heritage conservation in an inclusive and integrated manner. Through the scheme, government envisaged to make cities vibrant and competitive, capitalize on its cultural resources and capital through tourism. Further, it planned to integrate the local knowledge and skills with economic development and develop entire city while displaying its character. This was for the first time for cities in India that development was undertaken with heritage as its core, and thus it can be considered as the representative of cultural approach in urban context. Therefore, in order to understand the schemes and cities, translation of the scheme with respect to approach, conceptual understanding, integration with the planning process, efficiencies of the cities to take leadership role and create vital collaboration and city strategy to deal with their own capacity to address culture. Certain limitation observed in these projects, these observations are from the academic perspective. Issues we see in the approach is Hriday marks a shift from cultural and regeneration model to cultural led regeneration model, integrating cultural places and activities with urban fabric and creating collaborations at various levels of enabling environment. It adopted cultural tourism approach within this larger model, focusing to drive economic growth and build city image through tourism. Further, it adopted cultural district approach in these cities. However, it did not adopt the decentralized approach. This approach is also often considered to create conflict with the tourist and host priorities where mostly the tourist community gets prime attention. The schemes here may create similar kind of conflict. Further, this concept also faces internal industrial challenges and may not derive returns as projected due to lack of sufficient mass in terms of cultural assets, long-term viability and sustainability at a spatial and socio-economic and environmental scales. The project, however, does not have any provision for evaluation of long-term viability, sustainability at spatial, economic and environmental scales. Moreover, this approach can be improved to address grains of the diverse culture of the city and can be more inclusionary in its selection, particularly for the disadvantaged community or very unique or distinct culture. The approach can be supported with proper evaluation of its scale of investment and impact of quality of life and sustainability. So, we also see that it needs to have larger understanding on the conceptual interpretation. We also see that it needs to integrate the planning process with the other urban layers as well. And then we see that there is also need for connecting to cater to the local communities in this intervention. Furthermore, reviewing the aspect of partnership and collaboration, this scheme envisaged to work in collaboration and partnership with the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, state government, local government, the private sector, academic institutions and local community. In the process, cultural related schemes provision currently available from different departments such as all these ministries can be integrated. Also, the capacity of urban local bodies can be improved in this direction. So, that was about the review of the key intervention in our country. We just selected very, very few. There are a lot of things which are happening, but you need to see everything in one perspective. You may reflect on the diversity we have, the resources we have and what our future would look like, and how through the conscious planning interventions we can guide our future of our cities and also future of our culture. So, summarizing today in this session, we saw in the beginning we discussed about culture, its significance and why it is important for sustainable development. We looked at the international interventions, then we looked at culture and cities, we reviewed the potential it has, the interventions which are done and what challenges are there. So, we saw with very few examples, that is not the complete picture. Thereafter, we looked at the international and national cases in brief so that you can build the connection between culture and the city planning. We looked at the case of Banaras and Ranchi. Further, we looked at how historical perspective on culture was changing in the urban areas through the international literature from city as the art of work to sustainable development. We also looked at different approaches adopted for culture in cities at the international level, in particular culture-led regeneration, cultural regeneration and culture and regeneration model. Lastly, we looked at the key interventions in India. Our coverage was very limited. The intent was to make you aware of the issues related with culture. These were the references used here in this particular segment. Our coverage was limited with the scope to make you aware of the topic. There are enormous readings and movies available to explore. Few are suggested here. This is not an extensive list. You may feel free to suggest more from your experience. Please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about your concerns you have. Do share your opinion, experiences and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring cities and urban planning. Thank you.